Hey Ryan, this video is to you. I know we've been talking a lot recently about intellectual property, and I've just been thinking about it constantly. I've done tons of reading, listened to tons of content, especially by Stephan Kinsella, who is an excellent resource on this topic. And I know that we've been struggling a lot with intellectual property. A little backstory for everyone else. I'm a photographer, I'm also a software developer, so a lot of everything that I do is really wrapped up in this concept of intellectual property. And although I very quickly kind of understood and universalized the principles across the board for just about everything else, I really had a sticking point with intellectual property. And that's usually a sign that, you're biased and there's some cognitive bias going on when you just hit one of those arguments or thoughts that doesn't fit with everything else, but you just can't let it go and it feels emotional. That's exactly what this was for me. A few things have happened, I guess, over the past few years. I've had photos taken without my permission and posted on websites for profit. I've had software copied, obviously, without my permission or without my profiting off of that. So there has been moments in the past where I've been very angered by this, where I felt robbed, I felt stolen from, because other people are making, not just, benefiting from my work for free, but they are, they're profiting off of my work without even mentioning me. And so there's definitely been times in the past where it's been, very frustrating for me. And I think before I came to the principal position that I'm at now, there was definitely moments where I would, I felt fully justified in issuing DMCA takedowns to have other people's copies of my content removed, especially from YouTube on some of our other channels. And the same for some of my photos of all kinds of different events that I've worked to cover, things like that. So the argument for it is really an emotional one in a lot of ways. It's like we work really hard, we put a lot of time and effort and resources into buying our equipment and loading it up and finding things to cover and finding and creating and coming up with useful content ideas, going out there, breaking the equipment out, busting ass for days and days to try and record things. For example, the open carry protest that we recently covered in Dallas. And we shoot photos, we shoot video, and then what happens? People just download whatever we create and upload it on their own channel and whatnot. That's why this has really come up a lot, and I could not let it go. I could not let it go. So I had to start from the very beginning, work from the fundamentals, from the baseline up, and I really kind of kept going back and forth along the way. And I think I finally reached a point where I got this understood, and I have kind of found the logical, consistent position on intellectual property. So that's what I wanted to kind of share with you today. Really quick, because there's tons of other video out there where you can find the origins of intellectual property, but basically the moment I think the first copyright mandate came into existence was in the 500s. Some dude named Columbia in Northwest Ireland had a copy of the Book of Psalms, one of the books of the Bible, loaned to him. He had to give it back pretty quickly to the guy he borrowed it from, so he, as fast as he could, made a written copy of this book. Long story short, the dude that loaned it to him demanded somehow that he, because I guess it was his original book, that he had the rightful ownership not only to the book that he was returned to him, but also to the copy that the guy made. So this dispute went all the way up to the king, who basically equated the original book to a cow and the copy of the book to the cow's calf. And it said, well, if you own the cow, then you own its calf as well when it gets born. So this judgment, that didn't solve anything. It resulted in the Battle of Coldremini, which I guess I'll never be able to pronounce properly. But anyway, 3,000 people died because of copyright. The proud tradition continued today by the MPAA and RIAA, musicians, writers, photographers, software developers everywhere. Many years later in Britain, basically the situation is that if you are one of the few educated that have the skills to write and copy books, then you are sort of empowered to almost control all knowledge, because whoever has access to your library has access to knowledge, and if they don't have immediate access to walk in and look at the books that you own, then no one can read or learn or know the things that you know. When the printing press was invented in Britain, obviously that broke that monopoly that these scribes or these people that had the ability to copy this stuff had. And that was terrifying. I think the Queen at the time created laws that created, licensing, so you couldn't make copies of things unless you were a licensed printing press operator. And then, of course, as usual, when the government wants to regulate something, they then started telling the printing press owners which things they could copy and which they couldn't. The founders in America brought it over sort of by default. And because they were kind of the smarter, more intellectual types, they are the types of people that these laws would benefit in the first place. So it was just kind of, they just kind of continued that tradition here in America. Soon after in America, there was some backlash against copyright and intellectual property. But by that point, the benefactors of these laws had already grown used to it and fought very hard to keep it in this country. And it was just kind of already a lost cause right from the very beginning. So my thesis that I've arrived at, painstakingly, I might add, is that intellectual property does not actually exist. Here's why. First of all, on its face, the term intellectual property sort of serves as a propaganda tool. Like, just the name itself spins it in the direction that they wanted it to go. Calling it intellectual property changes how we think about it. Changes how we think about the arguments, changes how we think about things we create with our minds. It makes us apply common property thought processes to things that don't actually exist, ideas and processes in terms of patents, things like that. Many people have made many excellent arguments, especially Stephan Kinsella, who's an intellectual property lawyer and also an anarchist that believes intellectual property is wrong and doesn't exist. A lot of the things I've learned have come from him, so thank you for that, Stephan. I think I have a unique argument that I haven't heard anyone else make, so I'm feeling pretty good about it here, and I want to give it to you. I think our ability these days to copy IP easily and cheaply has made us re-examine what we're actually being asked to pay for. So it makes natural sense to purchase a CD of music. You go to the store, you buy a CD, for anybody that remembers doing that. You go to the store, you purchase a CD, you walk out with something physical and tangible in your hands. I bought this thing. You're not actually thinking, oh, I'm licensing this music. The zeros and ones on the CD that make, if I play them in a certain way, creates a song that someone else owns, right? You're purchasing a physical item. Now that physical item is gone, and we're still asked to pay, and are also, sort of bullied for sharing this stuff, I think the facade is gone. I think now we kind of see we weren't actually buying that CD, we were licensing it based on these copyright laws. So here's what I think has given me a different view on intellectual property that maybe has helped me to arrive at a new argument for this. Recently, over the past couple of years, I've had heavy exposure to 3D printing and the easy and free methods that we have now of sharing physical objects. It's had the same effect on me for physical objects as I think the general public has experienced over the past 10 years or 20 years for music and photography. So to give you an example of sort of the paradigm shift I think we get in our thought process on intellectual property from 3D printing, my son, we purchased some baby food spoons a long time ago. And these are really cool spoons, shaped very well. He just seemed to, feed using these spoons better than other objects. They were insanely expensive for little plastic spoons. So what did I do? Well, I have a 3D scanner. I took one of these spoons, I scanned it. I made a perfect three-dimensional representation of this spoon on my computer. I cleaned it up, I modified it. I actually modified it a little bit, which just to think about this stuff is amazing. I took this real physical object, I scanned it in, I improved it, and I stored it. So not only do I have a perfect copy of this real object on my computer, backed up for all time, not only did I improve it, but then I was able to 3D print it. And now I have multiple copies of this spoon, of my version of the spoon that's been improved. Not only that, but I then took that file that I shared, I took that file that I made and improved, and I shared it online with others who have then downloaded and printed it and shared it themselves. So the paradigm shift happening here is that we can attempt to apply the same rules of intellectual property to physical objects instead of just songs and software and images. It's extremely clarifying, to me at least, to be able to finally reach sort of a common denominator for this discussion. Here's the common denominator. Everything is media. Everything is media. The plastic I feed into my 3D printers to reshape it into objects is media. The paper I feed into my laser printer to record a book onto is media. The hard drive platters or memory chips that I rearrange at a molecular level to record the pattern of a song onto or a photo onto is media. Now, here's where it crosses and it crosses the divide and kind of makes it universally, here's your common denominator. The dirt on a plot of land that I record the pattern of a crop farm onto is media. So the universal common denominator here is the media. The property that we own and trade is the media. So I own the land. I can choose how to use it. I decide to turn this piece of land into a farm by recording the pattern for a farm on it. Do I own that pattern of the farm? No. Somebody else can come along and see my farm and appreciate how well it works, and they can go to their media and draw that exact same farm onto it. So as 3D printers become more powerful, more prevalent, and the materials that are available to us vary more and more wildly, I think this argument will become more and more apparent. Already, in 3D printing, we have multiple types of plastic. We can do metal, we can do wood, ceramics, rubbers, and more. So now that we have a common denominator, let's try taking IP law and see if it still works on physical media. One way of doing this would be to say, okay, you love Ford Mustangs. Your friend has one. You fell in love with it. You think it's beautiful. You love that car. So you go out and you purchase all of the raw materials necessary to build your own Ford Mustang. You go to his house, you look really closely at his car, you take a bunch of measurements, and piece by piece, probably over a long period of time, you assemble your own Ford Mustang from scratch. I don't think anyone in the world has any illusions that you've stolen something, that this is theft, or that you're, infringing on the Ford Motor Company's rights here. You've used your own resources and you have built something from scratch. IP law says you have infringed. So now let's apply the same paradigm shift that we had for music and photography to 3D printing or 3D physical objects. So now you really, really like your friend's Ford Mustang. You go to the store and you buy some, vats of chemicals that a 3D replicating machine can use to very quickly basically print your own Ford Mustang that you scanned in perfectly from your friend's Ford Mustang. I just said Ford Mustang like 5 times. So now you've taken your friend's Ford Mustang and you've purchased and owned your own media and you've recorded the pattern of a Ford Mustang onto your own property. We've taken real physical matter and we've subjected it to IP law. And I think it's here that we see it starts to fall apart. When you make your Mustang copy, there is no injured party. You owned the media that you recorded that pattern of a Mustang onto. Just like when you copy that pattern of zeros and ones for a song onto your hard drive, or those letters in that particular order onto your paper, or that design for an efficient farm plot onto that dirt you own, the property is never the ephemeral pattern being recorded. It's always the matter onto which we record that we can own and trade and exclude others from using. Treating the ephemeral pattern IP as property is immoral. Here's why. Stephan Kinsella makes a very interesting point on property rights. And this changed how I think about property rights in general. It's genius. Property rights do not give us the right to use something, but instead they give us the ability or the right to exclude others from using that thing. So why does that matter? For example, you can own a gun, but you can't use it to shoot someone. But you can deny others from using it. Because we own something does not give us sort of free rein to use it however we want. It's not the use that is the property right, it's the exclusion of everyone else. Technically we can do with our property what we want, but our rights stop at the nose of the person next to you. So I think hopefully I've just garbaged up that point pretty well. Okay, so why is intellectual property immoral? Intellectual property grants a person, let's say me, I take a photo. Intellectual property grants a person that records a unique pattern onto media, onto matter that they own, a share in the control of the other matter owned by every other person in the world. So what I'm saying is that intellectual property grants me, the guy that takes a picture, a share, a little piece of control of your property and every other person's hard drives in the world. Because I took this picture, I somehow get this magical ability to control your physical property, your hard drive. A person can create something in a vacuum with no agreement or consent from anyone else, and then turn around and use the force of government to somehow gain partial control of everyone else's physical property. The IP creator has no rightful claim to others' property, yet they somehow think they can or should initiate force to affect other people's use of their property. So let's go back. Imagine you're still looking at your pile of components, and you begin to assemble them into your Ford Mustang. You start stitching the leather, mixing the paint, welding the aluminum together to create your Ford Mustang. At some point, you hit a moment where you tighten a bolt enough or you stitch some leather together, and suddenly and magically, at some point, when no one could really tell you, the pattern of your matter is now too closely matching that of some different matter owned by the Ford Motor Company. In that moment, some strangers whom you've never met, never agreed to anything with, never contracted with, can now arrive with deadly force of government to take your property and throw you in jail. This is clearly absurd, immoral, wrong, and stupid. So I think the power of this argument, thinking about 3D printing, thinking about where we're going with this, shows that there's now little difference between this example of a Mustang and copying a Metallica song. The main counter argument I hear is you're going to be hurting musicians. You're going to be hurting content creators. How are the creators going to make their money to pay their bills without it? I say this is a consequentialist argument. I don't need to offer an alternative to have and win the moral discussion that you don't have a right to summon the deadly force of government down upon me if I arrange my media, my matter, in a pattern that you think you own. That said, Stephan Kinsella makes this argument probably far better than I do. I would definitely forward you or suggest that you check out his work on intellectual property for more on that. All right, Ryan, so I hope that continued at least our discussion. I really look forward to hearing your thoughts or responses on all of this. And for everyone else out on the internet, I hope that maybe I at least made you think about intellectual property differently. This was just kind of my initial crack at it. So if you have any criticisms or comments or can take this further or in a totally new direction, I very much look forward to hearing it, seeing it, and continuing this discussion. Thanks for watching.